Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Good to see you guys. Just getting things rolling a few minutes before class time, but welcome back. I'm glad you're here. Hope you're safe and healthy with everything going on with these fires and stuff and everything else, I guess. but here we go. We'll be ready to start our philosophy meeting in a couple minutes. Hey, Rachel, good to see you. Hey, what's up, AJ and Emily? Yes, certain things are on fire. Fair enough. But at least none of us for the moment. Hey there, Haley, Ronald. I'm sorry to hear that, AJ. Yeah, I have some close loved ones that are not necessarily in the zone that's needing to be evacuated, but not too far away. So hopefully everyone's going to be all right. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully these fire seasons can become a little less intense over the long run. It's going to take some work, but I believe we can get there someday. Okay. Yep. Hey, Alexandra. Let me get my charger. I'll be right back. Okay. Okay, guys. Well, welcome back again. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to go ahead and let us get started. So it's a key meeting. I'm almost done with the midterms too. This next few days, I'll be sending you guys an email, an announcement through Titanium that the grades are in, and then you can just check with me for your score and any comments on the midterm. Some have not checked on the first essay, but those have been done for a while, which I've noted also in a previous announcement. So for the grades on the first half of the class assignments, you can check on those later in the week. You can already ask about the first essay, or if you'd rather wait until I finish the midterms in the next few days, then hang tight and you can check in with me over the weekend for those scores. But we keep moving on in the class. Now these new lectures, this new topic that we're focused on is epistemology, the theory of knowledge. I started to address it with you guys last time by just telling you a little bit about the history of the ancient Greeks, Socrates and Plato. Oh no, I would never forget your essay. No, AJ, it's been graded. It's been done for a while. I think maybe 3/4 of you guys have sent me requests for the grades, and I've sent back the comments and so on. But let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, but I was telling you last time about the ancient Greeks and the life and death and trial of Socrates. Then we just started to develop a little bit of a vocabulary involving some terms that are used in epistemology. Epistemology, the study and the theory of knowledge. So let's just quickly review some of those big terms to get us situated in today's meeting. Today what we're going to do is finish the work of Socrates and then move on into the work of Gettier, who basically challenges the definition of knowledge that was given by Socrates and by the ancient Greeks. Okay, so first of all, what's a proposition? Tell me that. What is a proposition? Somebody knows, and they'll just tell me, and we'll go from there. So that's the first little piece of a review question I have from the last lecture. What is it? It is the meaning of a sentence. Yes, correct. It's the meaning of a sentence, not to be confused with the sentence itself, because sometimes there can be multiple sentences which have the same meaning. Like if I tell you I'm in the kitchen, that's the same as saying the kitchen's where I'm located. In one case, I'm the subject of the sentence, and in the other is the kitchen, but the information is the same information given. So we can also imagine that in two languages, the same proposition is expressed. Maybe in one language, English, we say the snow is white. In another language, German, we say der Schnee ist weiß. Although those sound different to the ear and they look different on the page, they're the same proposition. Okay, next up, what does it mean when a proposition is true? That's the next big question for us. When you have a true proposition, what is that all about? What does it take for a proposition to be a true one? And that's important for us to know. So just let me know, what is that? We've got a true proposition, and this means, in other words, what about it? What's a true proposition? Just tell me. We spent some good time on this last time, so I'll be very sad if you don't know. But you do know, so I'm not worried. What does the word truth mean? Don't be shy. All right. It matches the facts of reality. Exactly. When what the sentence or proposition says matches the facts of reality, then that's what it means for the sentence to be true. Okay, good. So like there's fires happening right now in Orange County. That's just true. That's a fact. You know how everybody, it's like popular slang nowadays, people be like saying facts. Well, truth is facts, okay? Like the facts of the actual objective reality. When you say something that matches those facts, you're saying something true, okay? And if you're saying something that's not true, then it doesn't match the facts of reality, okay? We all can be clear on that. Now, next up, so like if I say there's no fires, that would be false. Right? That would be a claim, but it's a false claim, it's a false statement, it's incorrect to the facts. What is a belief then? What's a belief? If a person has a belief, just let's build on what we've already said so far. What's a belief though? It is good so far. I'm having a lot of good days, but I've been busy with grading. But I have a question for you and everybody, Red. What is a belief? What's a belief? It's when a person thinks that a proposition is true, exactly. So if you think that a proposition is true, if you take the attitude towards it that you agree with it, that you think it's a fact, that means that you believe it, okay? So, you know, if you think that, I don't know, that a person, like if you have a conspiracy theory or something, you think the moon landing is fake, then the statement that the moon landing is real, you don't agree with it. You think that that's not what really happened. So you're a person who can determine your beliefs, basically what you think are the real facts, and people don't all agree on the facts. Like some people think that coronavirus is not real or that it's not dangerous, and of course, we hope the vast majority of people disagree with that, but beliefs people can divide over, but they're just one set of objective facts. Okay, now next up, what's justification? When it comes to this epistemology talk, what's justification though? You said to me that a belief is just thinking something's true, and something being true means matching the facts. Okay, so yeah, justification, good, Haley, Rachel, is having good reason, good evidence to back up, to support your belief. Okay, so what then did the Greeks think knowledge was? They said that knowledge was these three things put together, justified, true belief. So you have knowledge if and when you think something's true, so that's the first part, you gotta at least believe it, but it's not enough to believe it. Knowledge requires more than that. Also, it has to be a true belief, so it has to be correct to the facts. And then the third thing is you have to have justification for it. Otherwise, you're just kind of guessing and you don't really know, even if you happen to be correct. Okay, and like we spent some time at the tail end of the last meeting just giving some examples as to why each of the required conditions is needed. You know, like just intuitively, like common sense, for example, tells you that you would not be credited with knowing something if you reported incorrect information in giving an answer to a question. So accuracy and being correct is a requirement for knowledge, for sure. You have to believe the thing, you have to have evidence too. If you didn't have evidence and you happen to be correct, that wouldn't be something that you knew, it would be just a correct opinion. Okay, so then we've got enough of a vocabulary down to just start jumping into the analysis of this ancient Greek writing by Plato. So this is the writing of Plato, and his dialogue is called the Meno. Keep in mind the lifetime of Plato, quite long time ago, from 428 to 347 BC. That's when he lived. And in this dialogue, as I told you last time, in many of the Platonic dialogues, most of them, Socrates, his teacher, is the character who's the speaker, the main character. So we've also got Socrates in the dialogue here, and just as a reminder of the dates that he lived, a little bit older, 469 to 399 BC. Now, Plato is the writer of the dialogue. The speaker that speaks in the dialogue is Socrates. So there we go. Let's see what they said. The selection given for this part of our class, the essay for this, is quite short. It's just 2 pages. It's less than 2 pages. So I'm going to just go through it and read it to you line by line. And whenever there's something to explain in the dialogue, some insight that's being discussed, then I'll break off and try and explain it to you a little more. Okay, so here's how it starts off. This dialogue, it kind of reads like a play with 2 characters, a short vignette or something where the 2 characters have a discussion, and one character is Socrates and the other is Mino. Now, Mino was this general in the military of Greece, and him and Socrates are just having a chat about, well, what is knowledge? And here's how it goes. Okay, so Socrates starts off by asking this question to Mino. He says, hey, Mino, a man who knew the way to Larissa, or anywhere else you like, and went there and guided others, would surely lead them well and correctly? And Mino answers, certainly, Socrates. Okay, so pause. What's going on right there is that Socrates is asking Mino, suppose that somebody knew how to get to this other city in Greece called Larissa. If they know how to get there, and they've gone there many times previously, so they know the route by heart, they're very familiar with that route from point A to the destination, Larissa, couldn't they use their knowledge of how to get there to lead somebody else there who has never gone before? Okay, just the name Larissa that they're talking about. It's a city in Greece. It's about 100 miles north of Athens where they're speaking. And it's the original birthplace of Mino. So he's referencing that because Mino would know this since it's his hometown. So I hope the question so far is not too confusing to you. All he's saying is something really straightforward, like if somebody knows how to get somewhere, couldn't they lead a new person to that spot, right? Now, when we used to have college classes in a physical classroom, right, before the pandemic, I've taught this lesson so many times, and when we're all in the classroom gathered together, I will use this kind of example. I will say, okay, you guys, we're all here at whatever, Fullerton, Cal State Fullerton, we're all in this classroom together, but you guys have got somewhere at night where you sleep, where you stay, like your apartment, your dorm, or your house, whatever, you live somewhere, and wherever you stay at night, you know how to get there because you came from there to this classroom. So I asked the students, right, since you know how to get to wherever you live from this classroom, couldn't you, if you really wanted to do it, lead some new friend who's never been to your place before to accurately to that destination? Couldn't you use your knowledge of how to get there to lead somebody else there, right? Now, does that make clear enough sense? And what do you think is the real answer? Mino gives the answer. He says, for sure, certainly, Socrates. So all clear? If a person knows how to get to a place like Larissa or just anywhere else, That's just an example, but the point generalizes from that. If you know how to get to some point B from where you're at, point A, couldn't you lead a new person there using the knowledge? Mino says certainly. Okay, so point taken, that's point one. From there, Socrates continues in the dialogue. So he goes on and he says next, well, what if someone had had a correct opinion as to which was the way, but had not gone there, nor indeed had knowledge of it? Would he not also lead correctly? And Mino again says certainly. All right, so here it's a second question, and it's a little different. This first one was, suppose someone knows how to get there. They know the route. They've been there so many times. They've gone there so many times. They know how to get there. So couldn't they lead somebody? Yes. The second question, though, is this. What if someone didn't know how to get there, actually? They've never gone. They don't know how to get there, but they have a correct opinion about how to get there. Wouldn't that be able to be used in leading someone there? And Mino again says certainly. But now we got to dig in for a moment and ask what the words correct opinion means when Socrates is using them here. So a correct opinion. Okay, let me give you a little hint. When he says correct opinion, this means none other than two of the three conditions of the knowledge definition. So if you guys remember, what's knowledge? It is a justified true belief, JTB. So out of those three criteria, J, T, B, which of those two do you think correct opinion stands for? Correct opinion is two, but not the third. Which two of the criteria or requirements do you think correct opinion represents? So it's which of those three out of the JTB? Just using your knowledge of just common sense English, I think you can infer the answer here. So a correct opinion is AKA a what without what. Let's see. Okay, part of it is that it's a belief. Yes, Alexandra. But I'm saying there's two parts. Yes, good. Ashkan, it's a true belief. Yeah, it's a true belief, but it's missing the justification element. So a correct opinion is just having a belief which is true, but you don't have any like reasonable evidence or anything to back it up, to justify it, okay? So that's what it is. Correct opinion is a true belief without justification. Okay? A true belief without justification. So what he says then to Mino, the second question is, okay, forget about someone who knows how to get there. They could certainly lead someone there. But what if a person didn't have knowledge? They just had a correct opinion as to what the correct way was. Would that not also be able to let them lead someone there? And Mino again says yes. To make this question a little more relatable for you guys, let me try and get that. Yeah, sorry, a little glare. It's not perfect, but I think it's good enough. Okay, to make this question he's asking Mino a little more relatable to you, let me put it in a more modern context, like today. Okay, so sometimes nowadays you know how to get to a place from where you're at because you've gone there so many times, like you know the route by heart. That's one case. Another case, though, especially today in 2020, is that you might be going somewhere and you've never gone there before. But what is the most popular way of trying to get to a destination when you yourself have never made the trip before and you still want to make sure that you get there correctly to the right location? Today, nowadays, I think a lot of us, at least me, I'm speaking for myself, are quite frequent users of such things as what? GPS, okay, yeah, like Google Maps, if you have like a navigations assistant with you, right, in your phone. Okay, so think about his question sort of like that. Suppose someone does not know how to get there, but they have an accurate map with true directions that are correct. So they don't have the knowledge of what way it is, but relying on this external aid, they have a correct opinion. Well, wouldn't that also just as well lead them and others who follow them to the destination? And Mino, yeah, he says, certainly. So next question in there. Socrates says, well, as long as he has the right opinion about that of which the other has knowledge, he will not be a worse guide than the one who knows, since he has a true opinion, even if it's not knowledge. And Mino says, in no way worse. So basically there he's saying, well, what's the comparison? Knowledge versus the correct opinion. It seems like you get to the same results, and he won't be a worse guide, even though he doesn't have knowledge. As long as he's got that GPS or map and it's a correct map, it'll work just as well as a substitute for having the actual knowledge formed from prior experience going there. But now they continue, and Socrates has another question. So he says, so, talking to Mino, so correct opinion is no less useful than knowledge? All right? So that's a question he's asking, and the question now on the table is this. Well, if both of them could lead you to the destination of Larissa, knowledge or just the correct opinion, then is there anything better about having the real knowledge versus just having the map that's correct? Like, is it more useful or to your advantage to have the actual knowledge of the destination and know it by heart versus just having the map to rely on, even though the map is correct? And I don't know, what is your thought about that? If I asked you, is there anything better about knowing your way to a destination by heart versus going there the first time but having an accurate navigation assistant? Would there be any additional benefit to having the knowledge? What do you think? If so, what is it? What's the reason that that might be in your better interest if you had to pick? Knowing how to get there on by heart because of the knowledge of the destination and the route versus just having the right map. What do you believe? Is there any reason why it's better to have the knowledge? That's what Socrates is asking Mino, so I'm asking you. And what do you think? Could there be any advantage? It's an opinion. I mean, you've got to have a viewpoint on that. You can tell me you don't think there's any advantage if you really think that, but I mean, just have to defend your reason. But I mean, what do you think? It's kind of a yes or no. Is there an advantage or not to knowing versus just having the map? Because you know both situations you've been in. Like sometimes you know your way there by heart. Sometimes you're like, well, I've only got a map, but it works. Okay, Sierra, you say maybe it's better because you could take a shortcut. That's one way to look at it, maybe. Because if you know the route, then you know all the alternative routes as well, and you sort of know how to get there in an expedited way. That's possibly one advantage. Haley, you say you don't think there's any advantage because either way, you're going to get there to the same place no matter what method you use. I sort of see that point as well. Red, you're just saying it would be good to know. You could give me a little more reasonable reason why. But I'm surprised more of you guys don't have a view on this. I guess it's probably because a lot of you are just thinking, yeah, I don't want knowledge. Knowledge is almost too much work. Can't I just outsource the labor intellectually to these machines and these devices so I don't have to clutter my mind with the thoughts and the memories of how to do it? But yeah, Red, you're also saying you can know the best routes for the best situations and stuff. And I mean, honestly though, right, don't you sometimes feel like a little bit less certain about relying on the system when you've never gone there before? Like, even if it's correct, you haven't done it yourself, so you don't necessarily know whether to trust the correct directions at every step of the journey. You know what I'm saying? Like, Ronald, if you have knowledge, it's imprinted in your brain and save time by not looking it up. Well, there's also that. I was kind of thinking that, like, you know, if you've been there a million times and you know the route just like the back of your hand, then suppose there was like a fork in the road or some signage that was a little bit hard to read, and you were not sure how to connect it with the instructions provided on the map. At that point, you might make a misjudgment about what the map says to do, and you could get lost along the way. But if you've been there so many times that you know all the ins and outs of alternative routes and everything, then you're not going to get lost. You're going to get there for sure. So one way of looking at it is the person with knowledge will always make it to their destination, but the person who just has the correct opinion will only get there at times because they don't have that prior experience to sort of fall back on so that they can trust that they're still going the right way. I feel like that's the correct sort of answer, and that's what Mino says. So here Mino say to Socrates. So Socrates says, so correct opinions no less useful than knowledge. Mino comes back and says, yeah, to that extent, Socrates, but the man who has knowledge will always succeed, whereas he who has a true opinion will only succeed at times. Okay, and now Socrates, channeling the very, I feel like, modern perspectives, pushes back and he says, wait, why is it better though? I mean, if it's a correct map, that should be just as well. So he says, how do you mean that? Won't he who has the right opinion always succeed as long as the opinion is correct? And Mino then, ready to give up, he says, that does appear to be true of necessity. And now you make me wonder, Socrates, if this is the case, why is knowledge prized so much more than the right opinion, and why are they different? Okay, So now Socrates is ready to tell him his own answer as to why knowledge does have more value than a correct opinion. And he tells Mino, do you know why you wonder, or should I tell you? And Mino says, by all means, tell me. So Socrates says, okay, let me tell you. So the next part of the little dialogue that they're having, the conversation they're having, involves reference to like a myth that existed, kind of like a cultural legend or superstition of ancient Greece. So I need to inform you about that a little. Just clear some space for that. So in the time that they lived back then, there was this amazing sculptor in Athens, Greece, and his name was Daedalus. Now, about Daedalus, he was a sculptor, like I said, but not just any ordinary sculptor. He was thought of as the greatest, most skilled, sculptor in all Greece. And he had developed a reputation for making the most amazing, realistic-looking, lifelike statues of human figures. And people thought this, okay, these sculptures, if you can get your hands on and come into possession of one of these Daedalus sculptures, they are very, very valuable and beautiful to behold. But it would be better for you if you could get one to attach it to the ground with ropes. Now, why did they think that? Let's see if you can judge or guess. If you hadn't read it, you probably could still guess. So they had this myth that the sculptures were so darn realistic looking, so lifelike, that if you did not tie them into the ground by means of ropes, if you didn't attach them and fasten them into the dirt with ropes, literally, the myth was that they were so realistic looking that without the ropes there to tie them down, like when you went to sleep at night or something, that they would get up and run away. They would turn to life, become animated, and escape from your property. So they said, if you're wise, you'll make sure that these remain secure on your property and attach them by means of ropes. Now, in reality, of course, they're statues and they don't run away, but maybe they were getting stolen or something in the dead of night, and this myth developed. So people would fasten them down with ropes. Okay, now this is a metaphor that he's trying to build up. What he's saying is the statue of Daedalus is a beautiful thing, with or without the ropes. But if you had to pick, you'd rather have it with the ropes, though, because the ropes allow you to have it not just for now, today, but into the future. They prevent it from leaving. They keep it secure. They keep the statue there with you so that you can have it for a long time. So the ropes add stability, and they prevent it from escaping. Now, he's saying that a correct opinion is not as valuable as knowledge for a similar reason. Because a correct opinion is missing what part of knowledge? Well, we've already said it. Correct opinion is a true belief, but it's missing justification. Now, he says if you have a correct opinion, that's a great thing, and you want to have a true opinion. But the problem is that if this opinion is not locked down into your belief system by evidence, by justification, then just like these statues, it's bound to get up and leave your mind and escape your mind. So the point is that true beliefs that you have, they just don't get, they do not get retained unless you have some kind of reasons or evidence that grounds them and leaves them in your belief system in a way that they don't leave, okay? Like when you have a correct opinion, like say you fill in one of those multiple choice questions on a quiz and you just had to guess at the end what the right answer was, and you're happy because you got the right guess. That's like a correct opinion, right? But if that same question was asked to the student who didn't even know why that was the right answer, if they asked them that in like 2 or 3 years, do you think that they would still have the correct answer in mind? No, because without the evidence as to why it is the correct answer, they'll either forget it or change their mind about it. But what are the facts that don't leave your mind, that you don't forget, and that you don't switch up and change your mind about? Those are the beliefs that you have that are based on good, solid evidence. So justification has the benefit of making sure that your correct opinions stay tied down and don't leave your mind, and therefore that's better than just having a correct opinion without evidence. So do you understand this is an analogy? The ropes are to the statues of Daedalus as what is to what. These ropes are symbolic of what in this analysis of knowledge? Ropes are meant to be kind of a metaphor, a symbol of what concept? Now you'll tell me that. What do the ropes represent? I give you this detailed little explanation. Now you can just tell me, give me something. What are these ropes supposed to stand for? Justification, yes, correct. They are the evidence, the justification that holds the beliefs in place. And what are the statues without the ropes? Statues with no ropes are comparable by metaphor, by analogy to what? These Daedalus statues that do not have ropes on them, that are unconnected by ropes. Those would be like true opinions, Ronald. Yes, they would be correct opinions. It would be a true belief, which is why it's a great and beautiful thing, because it's true. But it's not willing to stay for so long unless that justification grounds it. Okay? So why then is knowledge more valuable than having just a correct opinion? Because knowledge sticks with you pretty much. The additional element of justification is what converts, what transforms a mere correct opinion into something that you really know. Okay? So like, if I'm standing here and telling you I think there's aliens somewhere out there, you know, there could be, I'm just giving you my opinion. I don't really know that. But if there's somebody that like has like top secret information which shows like that there really are these life forms, then that person has evidence that I don't have. And therefore their belief is one that they're not going to change their mind about and they're not going to forget. So having facts and evidence that justifies a true belief allows it to stick with you for much longer. Having correct opinions, they're here today, gone tomorrow. You might forget what your opinion was, or you might switch it up 100 times, because without any evidence to secure it to your belief system, it's just sort of random and it's forgettable. So let me read then the words of the author and you can see what he said. So he says back to Mino, well, maybe you paid no attention to the statues of Daedalus, but perhaps there are none in Thessaly. Thessaly is where Mino now lives, and so he says maybe you haven't heard of these statues because in Thessaly they don't know about them. Mino says, what do you mean when you say that? Socrates responds, well, they too run away and escape if one does not tie them down, but they remain in place if they are tied down. And Mino just bluntly asks, so what? Socrates goes on. He says, well, if you acquire an untied work of Daedalus, it is not worth much. It's like acquiring a runaway slave because it does not remain. But it is worth much if it's tied down because his works are very beautiful. What am I thinking of when I say this? True opinions. Because true opinions, as long as they remain, are a fine thing. And all they do is good. But they are not willing to remain for long. And they escape from a man's mind so that they are not worth much until you tie them down by giving an account of the reason why. And that is, as we previously agreed, after they are tied down, in the first place they become knowledge and then they remain in place. That is why knowledge is prized more than correct opinion, and knowledge differs from correct opinion because it's tied down. And Mino says, yes, by Zeus, Socrates, it seems to be something like that. Zeus, like the main god of Greece, so like by God, Socrates, it seems to be right. And Socrates says, indeed, I too speak as one who does not have knowledge but is guessing. However, I certainly don't think I'm guessing that right opinion is different from knowledge. If I claim to know anything, and I would make that claim about few things, I would put that down as one of the things that I do know. And rightly so, Socrates, says Mino, and that closes their dialogue or their discussion. So there you go. That's one way of looking at the ancient Greek definition of knowledge. It's justified true belief, and justification is a major ingredient in that definition or analysis of knowledge, because what justification does is it transforms something from just being a random true opinion to something that you actually know, and justification provides the stability for the correct opinion so it won't leave your mind. I find it interesting to look back on this ancient Greek analysis of knowledge from like 2,400 years ago, because when we even talk about justification today, we employ a lot of these metaphors of basing something, right? When you say you have evidence, you say, well, what is your belief based on? Or the basis for my belief, the grounds for my belief. So basing something, grounding something, it recalls to mind the metaphor of literally tethering something into the ground to base it and to ground it that way. So beliefs that are justified, we say that they're based on something, that they're grounded by some evidence. And therefore, that kind of also helps you remember the ancient Greek articulation of this concept. All right. Well, as good as that was, JTB, knowledge is a justified true belief. That seemed to be the dominant interpretation for thousands of years. It withstood long centuries and centuries of tradition. But lo and behold, we finally take time machine forward to 1963, 2,000 years later, and in comes this American philosopher named Edmund Gettier, and he just pretty much showed us that this long-standing definition of knowledge that we had all taken for granted is actually not fully complete. It's not fully correct, which leaves us with disturbing questions to ponder, like, well, then what is knowledge? And if we don't know what it is, what does that mean? But yeah, let's talk about the next man in this series of lectures, and that's Edmund Gettier. You're now going to learn how, in a very brief way, in just 2 pages, this published paper, he destroyed and revolutionized our thinking about knowledge, and pretty much overturned this consensus definition that had stood for thousands of years. So that's Gettier's legacy, and I'll tell you now about him. So here's our new author, Edmund Gettier. Let me look one thing up about him. I believe he's still living, but I just want to double check and make sure. Yeah, he's still there. And by the way, his birthday's coming right up. So he was born in 1927 and still alive today. He was born on Halloween of 1927. So he's almost, what is that? 93 years old. He'll be 93 on Saturday. Yeah. So happy birthday to Gettier, great American philosopher. His paper is from 1963, and it's called "Is Justified True Belief Knowledge?" ? Is justified true belief knowledge? That's the title is a question. And kind of like a spoiler alert, in the end, his answer is going to be no, actually, it's not. That's not the right definition because, and here's what he's going to try and show us, that we can provide examples, scenarios in which there's a subject, an epistemic agent, who has a justified true belief, but still does not have knowledge. And if there can be cases where someone has met all the criteria, but they still don't have knowledge, then that shows you that there's something off with that definition. Because if the definition was correct, then it should be sufficient. That means that it should be such that in every case where somebody does have a justified true belief, that is knowledge. But if there are cases where we see that a justified true belief does not amount to knowledge, that shows us that the definition itself is incomplete or insufficient. Okay, so his goal then is to try and present to you and me, the reader, examples, scenarios where some individual is described in having a justified true belief, but yet still not having knowledge. So that's what I'm going to try and present. Now, there are these 2 famous Gettier cases in his essay. The first one is the one that everyone mostly talks about, that's kind of the most classical. But I'll see what I can do in presenting both. If I don't have time for both, at least we'll discuss the first one. There's a couple of preliminaries, though, that I have to go over first before we launch into his cases. So a couple of first little preliminary points in his paper here. Okay, so one point is this. Okay, number one, the point that it is possible, although not perhaps the most likely, but it's at least possible to have a justified false belief. That's a possibility. Okay, so clearly justification is good. Having reasons and evidence to back your beliefs up, to support them, makes it likelier that that belief, which is based on good evidence, is true. If not, why would we care about having evidence, right? If it led us towards falsehood, then we would say we don't want it. But usually when we have good evidence, it's not 100% of the time, but usually that leads you to the truth, right? That's why, like, I mean, in court, for example, to convict somebody or to prove that they're innocent, you need to have some presentation of evidence in the courtroom. But when you have that good evidence, it seems like, yeah, that's probably the right conclusion to draw from the evidence. So evidence usually leads to a true belief, but here's the point, not always. It's not always 100% of the time. Sometimes, anyway, you can have justification that was misleading. Evidence that made it really seem reasonable to think that something was the case, but actually, despite the evidence, it was not true. Can anybody think of even one possible situation or real situation, whatever, where a person could have a justified, but despite that, false belief? What kind of case can you think of like that? A justified belief, but still it's false. You can make up an example, or you can think of something real, but I would just love it if you have something to show for that idea. What could be like a case of a justified false belief? What do you think? Have you ever, I mean, I know you've had one at least in your life, but it might be hard to kind of have a memory of such a case right off the top of your head, but what do you think? What could be a possible situation where there's a justified false belief? Let's see. Because I just want to, I want to expand on and elaborate on the point you made here. He just says it very quickly. It could be a justified false belief. Just moves on like you already know what he means. But I want you to be able to make sure that it's clear. So what could be a case of such a situation? Because, I mean, I could obviously just give you some examples, but it's a little bit nicer when you've got something to throw out there. Okay, so framing someone for murder, that's a fair example, Andrea. Or if your eyes deceive you, that's another possible case, sure. So imagine, for example, that someone is having visual hallucinations from sleep deprivation or whatever, and when they see something in their field of vision, they think it's really there, but it's actually not. You could imagine in that situation that, like, the appearance of the hallucination gives them a reason to think that there's like a, I don't know, a body of water or an animal in a bush, and in fact that's false. So there could be that's one case, good, right? And then someone frames someone for murder or any crime, yeah. Suppose that someone's been accused of a crime and they're facing charges, but they're actually innocent of the crime. So the trial is trying to convince people of something which is not in fact true, that the person's guilty. But suppose that there was evidence that suggested their guilt, right? There's witnesses testifying that they had a motive. There's some, existing forensic evidence that makes it appear that they were at the crime scene. It is totally true that there have been cases in history where there have been mistaken convictions that were later overturned by DNA or something. And in all those cases, it is a justified false belief that the juror has in guilt. Okay, so justification usually leads us to the truth, but once in a while it can mislead. The mirage example, Gary, yeah, that's kind of the same. If you're in a hot environment, way off in the distance, you see something you think's a body of water, but that would be the optical illusion provided by the temperature conditions and the way the eye works. Okay, fair enough, good. So just anyway, there could be justified false beliefs. He also provides the definition of knowledge at the beginning, which is just the one we've already talked about, that knowledge is when a proposition is true, the subject believes the proposition, and the subject is justified in believing that proposition. But I want to make one note about that, because on page 345, he gives 3 different alternative statements of the classical definition of knowledge. But I just want you to all understand that those are not 3 different definitions. That's just one definition said 3 slightly different ways. Okay, so like, for example, the primary one says S, some epistemic agent, knows that P just stands for a proposition. S knows that P just in case the 3 conditions here are met. P is true, number 1. Number 2, S believes that P. And number 3, S is justified in believing that P. Now that's the classic way of presenting the criteria for knowledge. Another way of formulating it, which means the same thing but is slightly different language, is this. So S knows that P just in case, S accepts P, S has adequate evidence for P, and P is true. Now that might sound a little different, but it's really not different. For example, to say S accepts P, Which of the three conditions of JTB is that? If S, a subject, accepts P, a proposition, that's just a more fancy way, perhaps, of saying what about the subject, that they meet which condition of knowledge. To accept P is perhaps just synonymous with saying that what? You've got three JTB conditions. And so what do you think, which one of them is S accepts P? Just think of the meaning of the word accept, compare it against the criteria for knowledge, and you'll come up with the right answer. What you think that that represents in other words among the three standards for knowledge. No, to accept is not the justification part. So we got to try again. So you have now two options. Sure, I think you can figure it out from here. Yes, belief. Belief is thinking something's true, accepting it as true, same thing. Okay, the other alternative formulation of it. S has adequate evidence for P. So if S has adequate evidence for P, this is perhaps a more fulsome way of saying that which condition has been met. That one I think you'll definitely have. Justification, good. Okay, so all he's opening the paper with is that sometimes they say it as S accepts P. Sometimes they say it as S believes that P. Sometimes it's just S is justified, and sometimes they say S has adequate evidence for it. But whatever way we put it, it's still the same three standard conditions. JTB, justification, truth, and belief. Okay, and he only wants to state that definition so that he can then just tell the reader, here's what I'm going to try and tear down and criticize. So he opens the paper by like, hey, this definition of knowledge has received widespread consensus over the generations. It's JTB, some say it like this, some say it like that, but it means these three things. Then he gives us these two preliminary points. One of them we already covered, which is that it's possible to have a justified false belief. Now the second preliminary point, it takes a bit more discussion. It's a little more technical looking at first, but in the end it's actually saying something that is not so difficult to master and understand. So let me just write it out. It's what we call in epistemology the closure principle. Okay, so the closure principle is a principle of logic and epistemology which says this. If S, which is a letter that stands for a subject, it could be any person, that's why we just use a placeholder. If S is justified in believing some proposition P, and P entails Q, another proposition, and S, the subject, deduces Q from P, then, in that case, S, the subject, is also justified in believing Q. Okay, so if S is justified in believing P, P entails Q, S deduces Q from P, then in that case, S is also justified in believing the entailed proposition Q. So for us to really comprehend this statement, we have to all come to know what is it for one proposition to entail another one. And that is a concept, entailment, to entail, that probably you don't think of every day all the time, but I believe that if we just give you some examples, you'll be able to reason to the right definition of entailment just by hearing it used and reflecting on your memories of having heard it used in the past. Okay, so let's try to do that. Let me tell you one fact about me, and let's see if you can determine something that is entailed by that, all right? So a fact is that I was born in the 80s. That's the decade that I was born in, the 1980s. Can you tell me something that you think is entailed by that? So if I was born in the 80s, that entails many things. But what is one thing, perhaps, that is entailed by that? Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s, and this entails, among other things, that what? Well, okay, age, but be more precise, Ronald. What do you mean? What about age? That I didn't have a mobile phone growing up? Well, you know, they did have these big brick-looking cell phones, even in the 80s. Disco, come on, Gary. Well, how old I am. So yeah, but let's make a statement. If I'm born in the 80s, which I am, then you know you can deduce something that is entailed by that, because now it's 2020. So you've mentioned age. What would be a fact about my age that is entailed by the information that I was born in the 80s? If I was born in the 80s, then what does that entail about my age? At least 30, correct, yes. I have to be at least 30 if I was born in the 1980s, because all dates within the 1980s are over 30 years ago, correct? So, well, I might not be more than 30. It's theoretically possible to be just 30 if you were born, let's say, after October 27th in 1989. You'd be waiting on your 31st birthday. But without telling you my age, certainly I'm in my 30s at this point. But yeah, the question's not so much about me, but just the concept of entailment. Any man or woman born in the 80s who's alive today in 2020 is known to be at a minimum 30 years, because there's no way for it to be true that you were born in the 80s, but you're younger than 30 today. That's just impossible, okay? Let's try again another example of entailment, all right? So there's more than 20 people watching this lecture live right now. What is something that entails? You could just use numbers, I guess. If there's more than 20 watching the lecture, well, one thing that follows from that logically that is entailed by that fact is that what? If there's at least 20 people watching, then by entailment, tell me something that's entailed by that. And yeah, what do you think? If there's over 20 people watching a lecture on YouTube right now for Cal State Fullerton Intro to Philosophy, if there's more than 20, then tell me, is there more than 15? Does that follow? If there's more than 20 of us, does there have to be more than 15? Yeah, there is over 20. And if there's over 20, then logically there also has to be more than 15, because 20 is a bigger number than 15. So if it's greater than or equal to 20, it can't be less than 15. You understand? So entailment is a logical relationship between two statements. If statement A entails statement B, right? If A entails B, then if A is true, what do we know about B? If A logically entails a second statement, then what does that second statement have to be if the first one is true? So like, plug it in. I was born in the 80s. Let that be statement A. And let statement B be that I'm older than 30. If I'm born in the 80s, and if that's true, then the second statement that I'm at least 30, what does that have to be? Since A entails B here, and A is true, then B must also be true, correct? So when one statement entails another one, the truth of the first guarantees the truth of the second. You understand me? It is kind of like math. So like if there's more than 20 of us here, it guarantees that there's more than 15 also. That's just logic. That's just deduction, okay? And we could go on. I mean, since there's more than 20 of us watching this lecture, that means that there's at least 20 human beings that exist in the universe. And since there's more than 20 of us that are watching this lecture, that means that there's at least 20 people who go to college in the United States. You know, entailment. Since I'm giving you this lecture, it entails that I was born, because you know, nobody can give a lecture and never have been born in the first place. Okay, so that's entailment. And to make that fully precise, I'm going to write the definition of entailment here. So if A entails B, then if A is true, B must also be true. Okay, so I'm in California. Does that entail that I'm in the United States? I'm going to just try this with a couple more examples. I want to make sure it's coming through clear to you. I'm in California. That does entail the United States, but let's try the other way around. Say someone tells you they're in the United States. Does that entail that they're in California? Being in the US, does that entail that one is in California? Because being in California definitely implies that you're in the US, but not the other way around, correct? Because there's 49 other states. So from the fact that one is in the US, we cannot deduce that they are in California. But from the fact that one is in California, we can deduce that they are in the United States. It's not about probability, Gary. With deductive reasoning, it's all or nothing. It's just either implied or it's not. Okay, so the fact that one is in the United States does not logically imply that one is in California, because it's possible in a different possible world, at least, for somebody to be in one of the other states. So the first statement does not guarantee the truth of the second. Okay, you're a student at Cal State Fullerton. That entails that you applied for the school. But applying for the school does not entail that you will get in. A person can apply but not get in. But a person cannot get in and never did they apply. Okay, so entailment. Now that we know what entailment is, let's come back to the big closure principle here. And now we're going to have a better understanding of what it's saying. So here's what it's saying. Suppose that somebody has justification for believing one statement, one proposition, okay? But then they notice that that proposition implies a second one. All this is saying is that if that individual who already is justified in believing P deduces this entailment from P, that means their justification will transfer over to Q. So when you deduce a second proposition from a first initial one, the justification you had for the initial one just transfers and carries over to the second one. So when you're justified in believing some statement A, you are therefore also justified in believing a second proposition B, which follows from A, if you deduce it. Okay, so like, for example, what state are you in right now? Let me know that. Because, I mean, we're not, all together. If we were in a classroom, I wouldn't have to ask you this question. But you're all, many of you, I'm sure, are in California because you're attending Cal State Fullerton. But let me know. I see one person. Okay, you're in California. Probably that's going to be close to a unanimous. Is there anybody that's not in California? That'd be the better way to ask it, I guess. If you're not in California, let me know. But otherwise, I'll just assume we're all there. So you're in California. Do you have good reason to believe that you're in California right now? I would say so. I mean, it's not like you're just guessing, like, where am I? Maybe I'm in California. Just point my finger on a map, like, is that where I'm at? No, I mean, you have good reasonable evidence, right? Because you remember the sequence of events that's led to this moment, and you don't recall having exited the state or have been transported away, and you can see all the familiar environment and landmarks and the wildfires, of course. So you have great evidence that you're in California right now. Now, suppose that you're just a person who likes to play around with logic, and you're thinking about this entailment stuff, and you're like, well, I'm justified in believing that I'm in California. And one thing that I know that entails is, what did we just say? From the fact that you're in California, it logically must follow that what? You just let me know that. Being in California, among other things, entails that you're also where? In the United States. Okay, good. So plugging in these things in, you're justified in believing you're in California. Notice that entails that you're in the US. So you deduce the second thing. You're like, haha, it follows from the fact that I'm in California that therefore I am also in the United States. What this tells you is that the justification that you had for believing the first thing is the same good justification that gives you a justified belief that you're in the United States. Because the evidence for the first proposition is good enough evidence for the second one, because the second one is a logical consequence of the first. Okay, so once again, the closure principle, it says that if you're justified in believing one proposition and you follow that proposition through to an entailment, then you will also be justified in believing that second statement that you arrive at, because it just is a thing that follows from the first. So you're justified in believing that I was born in the 80s. What is your evidence? Well, because I told you. So you heard it from the person themselves. Now you got reasonable evidence to believe Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s. And if you then compute the math and you're like, well, it follows, therefore, that he's at a minimum 30, you're definitely then also justified in believing that I'm at least 30, because that's something that has to be true if the first proposition is true. Okay, so now with all these little preliminaries in place, we can go on and just break down this Gettier case, this first Gettier case. So now we're prepared with all of the knowledge we have to discuss this famous example. So this is Gettier case 1. And just to make it something that you can maybe more easily remember, I'll give it a little title, and I'll call it Smith and Jones Job Hunt for reasons that will become clear in a minute. Okay, so quick just side note, this is about to be an example of a situation where a person will have a justified true belief but not have knowledge. And as many scenarios in philosophy go, and as you guys have already learned throughout the semester, many times, oftentimes, perhaps even most of the time, the examples used in philosophical argument are not always realistic, sometimes quite far-fetched. You know, I've told you about cases where someone's lost on an island trying to find somebody else, or you know, they send off a ship, or they find a sphere in the woods, or, you know, any number of examples. And sometimes people find that a little frustrating because it's not too realistic, but I just want to remind you, the whole point is not to be realistic. It's not like we're talking about history or something. We're trying to advance arguments just conceptually, and that means that you just have to kind of think about the example and never mind the fact that there's some weird, unrealistic aspects to it. But anyway, here we go, Smith and Jones job hunt. So in this situation, we imagine that there are two people, two men, and their names are Smith and Jones. And what they are doing is they're applying for a job at a company, but they're competing for the job, and they're the two finalists. So only one of them is going to get it in the end, but they are the two last candidates to interview. So let's just show you who they are. Here's Smith. Here's Jones. And there's a boss that they've interviewed with who's going to make the ultimate hiring decision. So let that be this guy here, boss. Okay, now I'm going to erase the title of the case because I want to use some of the space up here. Now Smith, something's going on with Smith. Smith has this belief in his head, and he's developed this belief based on solid evidence. First, let me just show you what the belief is by drawing a thought bubble from Smith's head. So that just signifies that this is something that he currently believes. And it's this proposition that Jones, the other guy, will get the job. And second part, and Jones, the other guy, has 10 coins in his pocket. Okay? That's the belief that is going on in Smith's mind right now. And let me fill you in on the details why he thinks this. Okay, so first of all, he thinks Jones will get the job. But there's a solid reason why. Because, so after the interviews were all finished, you know, the boss talked to Smith, boss talked to Jones. For some reason, there was a moment where where Smith and the boss were alone. They just had a private moment for just a little bit. Maybe Jones stepped out to the restroom or something, and there was Smith with the boss. And the boss comes over to Smith, and he says this. He says, "Hey, Smith, I got to tell you something, just privately. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I just want to kind of give you a heads up that I kind of made my mind up, and I've decided I'm going to hire Jones, not you. I just think Jones is going to be a better fit for the company. And I was really impressed with his interview, so I'm sure you'll get a great position, but I don't want you to leave just yet. This is just me talking to you personally. I'm going to make a formal announcement when everyone's back here. But like I'm telling you, Smith, I'm sorry, but in the end, I'm going with Jones." So you understand that's why Smith believes that Jones will get the job, because literally the boss who decides told him that. And he doesn't have any reason to doubt that the boss is telling the truth. So he now thinks Jones will get the job, to his disappointment. Now the second part, that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, that part of the situation is a little weird, but I'll tell you bluntly, okay? So Jones comes back, and Smith and Jones are just in the waiting room, like the lobby area, just waiting for the boss to come back and make his announcement and the final decision. And so Smith looks over at Jones and he says, "Hey, buddy Jones, tough interview, huh? You know, I got a question. It's rare Random question. I'm just curious to know something. How many coins are in your pocket, buddy? Like right now, how many coins do you have? Jones is like, what, my pocket? How many coins? You mean change and stuff? And Smith's like, yes, how many coins are in your pocket? And he says, you know what? Look, I'm going to count them. Let me count them. Just give me a moment, okay? So this is weird, right? The Smith goes over, counts the coins in Jones' pocket, not his. He counts the coins out of Jones' pocket. And he's like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that's all of them. All right, thanks, Jones. I had to know. I had to know how many there were. Thank you. 10 coins in his pocket. Okay, so he counted them physically, and he counted there's 10. So he believes, based on that very good reason, that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Okay, so now, let's call this proposition, label it D. D is the statement that Jones will get the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, Smith notices something, that from that statement, a second statement, which is very similar in wording to it, a second statement is entailed by this. And the second following statement, let's label it E. And what it says is just this, that the man who gets the job so removing reference to the name Jones, but just saying the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Okay, now what I want you to observe is that E is entailed by D. E follows from D. If D is true, if Jones gets the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, that means that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket, because it will be Jones who is the man that gets it and who has those 10 coins. So the closure principle now is going to kick